Hi kids, I'm David the journalist, and I'm glad you're all enjoying our trip here in Israel. Well, for today's adventure, we're back here on Mount Zion. You remember the last time we went into the tomb of David? Well, today we'll visit the upper room. Come on, let's go!
Welcome to the Cenacle. Cenacle means dining room in Latin. According to tradition, this is the place where the Holy Spirit came down upon the disciples as tongues of fire. Now, if this is the right place, that means that this is also where Jesus came to eat the Last Supper with his disciples.
Wow, I can imagine the long table and all the disciples sitting next to Jesus, just like the way Leonardo da Vinci painted it.
Well, back in those days, people lay down to eat. They didn't sit at the table as we do now. And it was here where Jesus gave them the greatest lesson of humbleness and service, when he himself started washing their dirty feet.
True. And that was the last thing Judas could bear from Jesus. He couldn't accept the fact that this soon-to-be crowned king should be serving in such a humiliating way.
What did you mean, Anna?
Well, just look at Judas. He was the only disciple who wasn't called by Jesus. He came to him because he thought Jesus would establish a kingdom here on earth, and Judas wanted a position in that kingdom. You know, we can even read in Matthew 8:19, where Jesus told Judas that he didn't have a house or even a place to lay his head. Jesus knew what Judas was planning when he joined the disciples. Nevertheless, Jesus gave him an opportunity anyway. He let Judas be close to him so that he could change. But Judas didn't change.
Wait a minute. So you mean that Judas could have changed? Wasn't he predestined to betray Jesus?
Absolutely not. God doesn't predestine us. That would be force. He gives everyone a choice and a chance. Cain wasn't forced to kill his brother Abel. God told Cain that he could control his temper and didn't have to sin. In fact, the prophecy in Psalm 41 verse 9 says that a friend would betray Jesus. It never even mentions Judas by name. The text says, "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me." You know, that friend could have been Peter or John or even Lazarus.
You know, Anna, this is also new for me. But it makes sense. If we are all predestined to be either good or bad, then we don't have free will. And then God is responsible for what we do. But if Judas could choose whether or not he would betray Jesus, then he alone was responsible for what he did.
True. But even so, he could have repented for what he'd done, just like Peter did, and Jesus would have forgiven him. But Judas wasn't sorry for what he did. He had remorse only for the consequences, and that's why he hanged himself. Nobody in this world is predestined for anything. Jesus, on the contrary, was predestined to die for us, and that's why he came to this world.
Wow. But what if the people and the priests had accepted Jesus as their Messiah? Would have Jesus died anyway?
The answer is yes, but the story would have gone very differently. Jesus would have been brought to the temple by the priests, but instead of being beaten, they would have laid their hands on him and confessed their sins. God himself would have had to sacrifice Jesus, just as Abraham was willing to kill his own son, Isaac. The prophecy and the symbols for the sacrifices would still have been fulfilled, and Jesus still would have died to save us all.
Wow. This is mind-blowing.
Hey, Let's go to the Garden of Gethsemane. We can talk more there.
Look, over there, do you see the different churches on top of the Mount of Olives? They are built to commemorate the struggle Jesus had in Gethsemane. In fact, that's where Jesus was praying when Judas, the temple guards, and the people came in the middle of the night to take Jesus to the priests.
Anna, I'm still thinking about Judas. What happened? Why did he do it?
Well, Judas was blinded by greed, by selfishness, and by thirst for power. And he let Satan take control over him. Judas wanted an earthly kingdom, and he was disappointed when Jesus didn't make himself a king. Judas thought that he could force Jesus to free himself from the soldiers, and then Jesus would take the throne.
Wow, that was clever. I mean, from a worldly point of view, of course. Anyway, he could have gained something out of it. I'm sure Judas thought the people would defend Jesus and would make him their king. And then Judas would be thanked for making everything possible.
Exactly. Judas really thought Jesus would free himself. And that's why he told the mob to hold Jesus tight. But he was terribly disappointed.
I imagine that Judas was even more convinced that Jesus would free himself when he told the mob that he was the one they were looking for, and the people fell to the ground as if they were dead.
Of course. But did you know that even that was prophesied? Psalm 27 verse 2 says, "When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat my flesh, they stumbled and fell."
That's interesting. But what happened next?
I'm sorry to say this, but Judas came to a very sad end. Judas was devastated when Jesus didn't free himself. He felt so much remorse. His plans had failed, and he couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for Jesus' death.
So that's when he threw the 30 pieces of silver on the ground that the priests had paid him for betraying Jesus onto the ground outside the temple. Judas shouted that it was too late, and at that moment, the priests hated him because he showed them their wickedness. And in complete despair, Judas went out and hanged himself.
I agree, but that's what the wages of sin are. That's the result for not accepting the grace of Jesus. Judas could have repented, but he didn't. On the other hand, the priests hated Jesus without any reason and used Judas to get what they wanted. The purity and holiness of Christ's character was a constant rebuke to their selfishness and corruption. And that's exactly what John 15, verse 25 says.
How terrible! Thank you, Sam and Anna. Well, kids, once again, we've learned so much today. Me? I see we're no different than Judas, because we too betray Jesus when we choose the world and its entertainment instead of following him. You know what? I have an idea. After you write these prophecies on the mind map, make a list with your class about the ways we all betray Jesus in our lives today. Then talk about what you can do to change. See you next week. Bye.